The night was ink black, with visibility reduced to nearly nothing. Upon receiving the signal, two muffled gunshots broke the silence, dropping two guards to the ground. Over the next 15 minutes, more shots echoed through the air until everything fell silent. Then the radio buzzed. The building is cleared. Proceed with evacuation. Fast forward 14 years, and I found myself in a hotel room, staring out the window at a brilliant sunset. Memories swirled in my mind, dragging me back to where it all began. With a glass of vodka in hand, I felt the burn of the alcohol match the sting of the past few weeks. Still, I clung to the fragile hope that not everything was lost. 6 weeks earlier, my life took a sharp turn. That was when I discovered, by sheer accident, that my wife of 12 years was having an affair. Isn't that how most unsuspecting husbands uncover such betrayals? By the way, my name's Ryan. Sarah and I met back in college during our junior year. We started dating and stayed together through graduation. I joined the Marines while she dove into job hunting. Back then, I loved her, but I didn't want to tie her down while I was stationed in unpredictable places. It felt unfair. 5 years later, after completing my service, I returned home. Within weeks, I landed a solid job in sales at a prominent company. My boss, a fellow Marine, had a knack for hiring veterans, valuing their discipline and work ethic. I excelled in my role, quickly making a name for myself. Around that time, I decided to re-enter the dating scene and gave online platforms a try. To my surprise and delight, I stumbled upon Sarah's profile. God, she looked incredible in her photos. Sarah was never a supermodel, but she had a dancer's physique honed from her years of practicing modern dance. She stood at 5 feet 6 inches with graceful legs, a curvy yet fit figure, and rich, chestnut brown hair cascading around her face. Her dark eyes and that infectious, heart-melting smile completed the picture. She embodied the girl next door charm, with just the right touch of boldness. I wasted no time signing up and messaging her. A week later, she finally replied, asking where the hell I'd been and why I'd ghosted her for 5 years. Her frustration told me one thing: she missed me. This was a good sign. We quickly rekindled our relationship, picking up right where we left off. Within a year, we got married, and a year after that, our first daughter, Emma, was born. Life seemed to be falling perfectly into place. My career flourished, although it required frequent travel. 2 years later, we welcomed Lily, our second daughter, into the world. With 2 children and a growing career, I was promoted, allowing us to move into a beautiful home in an excellent neighborhood with top-notch schools. The only drawback was the travel. Sometimes I'd be gone for 2 weeks at a time, but it was essential for my job. Sarah started voicing her concerns, asking when I'd be home more often. She admitted that she felt uneasy when I wasn't around. I promised her that once I climbed to the next level in my career, the travel would reduce drastically. Reluctantly, she accepted my explanation, but her irritation was evident every time I left for another trip. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. At first, it was the petty arguments. When I'd return, Sarah would blame me for things completely outside my control, saying, "If you were here more often, this wouldn't have happened," or "We need you at home, not gallivanting across the country." While her frustrations weren't baseless, I missed the deeper implications. Then there was the lingerie. One day, while rummaging through the laundry for a clean shirt, I found a silk set, a matching top and underwear. It was out of character for her. She usually preferred comfort over luxury for bedtime. The only time I'd bought her something like that, she wore it once and never again. I dismissed it, assuming she'd treated herself. Our intimacy took a nosedive next. Where we'd once had a passionate, lively connection, there were now excuses. She was tired or stressed. I figured things would improve once my travel slowed down and chose not to push the issue. I didn't want to make things worse. The final blow came through Daniel, a mutual friend. He called me one day, insisting we talk. When I finally returned his call, he hesitated before revealing he'd seen Sarah at a farmer's market, 40 miles away, with another man. Daniel initially thought it was me, but upon approaching, he realized it wasn't. He described them holding hands, laughing, touching, and even kissing. My chest tightened as Daniel apologized, saying he felt I needed to know. He added that he was certain of what he saw. His words were a gut punch. Clues I'd previously ignored suddenly clicked into place, though I still resisted the truth. Daniel, sensing my anguish, assured me he'd support me through whatever came next. He also suggested talking to a friend of his, Jason, who'd been through a similar ordeal. Back home, I acted as if everything was normal, though the strain was palpable. I combed through the house for evidence, but came up empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Finally, I agreed to meet Jason at a bar across town. I told Sarah I had a late meeting and headed to the dive bar, where Daniel and Jason were waiting. As the friend Daniel had spoken about, Jason and I exchanged a brief handshake, though it was clear neither of them relished the meeting. Jason, already filled in on my situation, expressed his understanding of my turmoil, but quickly shifted to issuing a stern warning. He began recounting his own harrowing experience, how his pursuit of revenge had spiraled out of control, leading to a 5-year prison sentence and devastating losses during his divorce and subsequent legal battle with his wife and her boss. Jason's piercing gaze locked on mine as he cautioned me against making rash decisions. "Don't let anger ruin your life," he said with a grim tone. I nodded, absorbing his words while curiosity bubbled up inside me. What alternatives would he suggest? When I asked, Jason admitted that, given the chance, he would still have gone after his wife's lover, but in a more calculated and subtle way, something that would catch the man entirely off guard. His disdain for the person who had intruded on his marriage was palpable, but he also acknowledged that knowing what he knew now, he would have pursued divorce as a priority. Our conversation shifted toward actionable advice, with Jason outlining the critical steps for handling a situation like mine. The first, he said, was to gather indisputable evidence of Sarah's infidelity. "You need proof," he explained, "so she can't deny it when confronted." The second step was to consult a divorce attorney to learn how to protect my assets and understand my rights. Third, he advised keeping a significant amount of cash on hand in case Sarah caught wind of my actions and froze our accounts or credit cards. Finally, he emphasized securing alternative living arrangements like a small apartment, in case I decided to leave or needed a fallback. While Jason's suggestions were logical, I clung to the hope that a straightforward conversation could resolve things. As I mentioned this, Jason's fist slammed down on the table, causing the glasses to rattle. His intensity startled me. "Don't be naive," he snapped. "Her boyfriend might already be feeding her lies about you. You need to know what she's been told and what she believes." Drawing from his own painful experience, Jason compared my situation to a battlefield, referencing my Marine background. "You wouldn't walk into an ambush without intel, would you?" he asked. His point was clear. I needed to plan meticulously with strategies to handle any contingencies. His question about my service caught me off guard. "Yes, I'm a Marine," I replied cautiously, unsure of where he was going with it. Jason leaned forward, his voice firm but quieter. "Then you know how critical strategy is. This is no different. You need to know which way is forward before you act." I sighed, the weight of his words pressing on me. The idea of my seemingly perfect marriage crumbling felt surreal. Jason offered a quiet apology for being so blunt, and the three of us sat in silence until Daniel broke it. "So, what's your plan?" he asked gently, looking at me with a mix of sympathy and expectation. After a moment of reflection, I admitted that my priority was to save my marriage if possible, but I also confessed my deep desire to make the other man suffer. Without risking my freedom, I clarified, trying to balance the storm of emotions inside me. Jason smiled knowingly. "Good," he said. "Let's focus on gathering intel." Jason advised against hiring a private investigator, citing the waste of time and money during his ordeal. Instead, he suggested I leverage my access to Sarah's bank, credit card, and phone records to look for unusual purchases or patterns. He also brought up the possibility of a second cell phone, a common tool for clandestine affairs, and recommended installing hidden cameras around the house to capture both video and audio. The idea of spying on Sarah made me uncomfortable, but I knew I couldn't ignore the suggestion. I reluctantly agreed, determined to uncover the truth and hold the other man accountable for disrupting my family. The conversation stretched on for another hour, with Jason emphasizing discretion. He warned me not to mention anything at work until I identified Sarah's lover, explaining that someone familiar with my schedule might tip them off. He also underscored the importance of subtlety when dealing with the other man, sparking a flicker of determination in me. If I played this right, I could outmaneuver him. The next workday, I took the first steps toward implementing the plan. Reviewing my upcoming travel schedule, I noticed a 2-day trip approaching. Concerned about someone at work knowing too much about my whereabouts, I approached my boss. Casually, I suggested extending the trip to a week to better accommodate the client. My boss agreed without hesitation, allowing me to create the perfect cover. The following step was to craft the illusion of being away while secretly returning home. Using a prepaid debit card purchased with cash, I began setting the groundwork for my next move. I purchased a return ticket from a different airline and ordered a selection of spy equipment online. Among the items were discrete cameras, along with a regular camera featuring an impressive zoom lens and excellent low-light capabilities. These tools formed the backbone of my plan to identify the man involved with Sarah and obtain undeniable evidence of her betrayal. My strategy was divided into 2 phases. First, uncover his identity, and second, capture their illicit activities on video, leaving no room for denial. I spent the day refining my plan, using skills I had honed over the years. However, the glaring gap in my strategy was the lack of a name or face for the other man. Without that, I couldn't risk confiding in anyone, not even Daniel or my boss, Hal. I recognized this process would take time, but I was resolute. By the end of the week, all my equipment had been delivered to Daniel's house, ensuring Sarah wouldn't stumble upon anything suspicious. The opportunity to install the cameras presented itself on Saturday, during Sarah's weekly shopping trip with the girls and her mother. With the house empty for several hours, I worked quickly but carefully, positioning the cameras in strategic locations and ensuring they were operational. The setup allowed me to monitor the feed remotely in real time via my tablet or laptop. With the cameras in place, I began searching the house for any incriminating evidence. Starting with our credit card bills, I looked for unfamiliar charges. Then, I inspected Sarah's closet, hoping to spot any new, revealing outfits that stood out. Though nothing conclusive turned up, I found a short, vibrant red dress I'd never seen her wear. It was unlike her usual wardrobe, and the thought of her wearing it for anyone but me sent a pang of betrayal through my chest. Overwhelmed and needing clarity, I decided to go for a long jog. Running usually helped me clear my mind and regain focus. Upon returning home, I spotted Sarah's car in the driveway and heard the joyous laughter of my daughters, my angels, welcoming me back. Their voices momentarily lifted my spirits, reminding me of what was at stake. Inside, Sarah greeted me warmly, inquiring about my run as she kissed my cheek. She quickly shooed the girls away to finish preparing dinner. That evening, over pork chops, I did my best to act normal. Later, after tucking the girls into bed, we sat together in the family room. The television buzzed in the background, but my thoughts were consumed by the possibility of Sarah's actions while I was away. Feigning fatigue, I excused myself early and retreated to the bedroom. In the quiet of the bedroom, I noticed Sarah's purse resting on the hope chest. Curiosity got the better of me, and I rummaged through it, desperate for clues. To my shock, I discovered a cheap, unfamiliar cell phone. Turning it on, I noted the number and checked the call log. Only one unknown number appeared repeatedly. I recorded it before powering off the device and returning it to the purse. The discovery solidified what I'd been avoiding. I could no longer deny her infidelity. Though heartbroken, Mark's advice echoed in my mind. Do nothing rash. I resolved to remain patient and focus on gathering more evidence. The following days were agonizing, acting as if nothing had changed while concealing what I knew took every ounce of self-control. When the morning of my next business trip arrived, I went through my routine, loading my bags into the car. Just before leaving, I casually asked Sarah if she had any special plans while I was gone. Her startled expression was fleeting as she replied, "Just the usual." Her words lingered as I drove to the airport, silently praying the cameras would reveal the truth. Concluding my work with the client in record time, I monitored the camera feeds remotely. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but then I reviewed earlier footage. My heart sank as I watched Sarah answering her secret phone. Though the audio was faint, I heard her call someone baby and discuss meeting discreetly at a motel. She laughed, turned her back to the camera, and continued instructing her lover to park a few blocks away. "Okay, baby, I can't wait. I'll see you tomorrow night," she said, her voice sickeningly cheerful. Rage consumed me as I processed what I had heard. He was planning to be in my house, our house. Images of what might happen flooded my mind, but Mark's warnings held me back. Suppressing my fury, I resolved to confront this man face to face. That night, instead of going home, I checked into a hotel to plan my next move. With no idea what time he'd arrive, I staked out the coffee shop where he was supposed to park. Renting a car for discretion, I found a vantage point with a clear view of the lot. Around 9 p.m., a silver BMW M3 pulled in. I snapped photos of the man as he exited, capturing his face and license plate under the bright parking lot lights. He parked on the far side of the lot and began walking toward my house. I clenched my fists, struggling to control the storm of emotions within me. Tapping into the coffee shop's Wi-Fi, I switched to my home's camera feed. Minutes later, I saw him enter the house and embrace Sarah passionately. I listened to their conversation, ball rising in my throat. They spoke about their excitement for the night, mentioning how she'd sent the kids to her parents and that they had the house to themselves. How considerate of her, I thought bitterly, seething as I watched them undress each other right in the living room. Their laughter as they ran upstairs left a trail of discarded clothes in their wake. Steeling myself, I exited my car and approached the house. The front door, left unlocked in their rush, allowed me to slip inside unnoticed. I went straight for his pants, retrieving his wallet and noting his name, Stephen Bannister. Copying his ID and other details in my office, I scanned and saved the information before carefully returning the wallet. Armed with everything I needed, I grabbed my camera and started recording. Quietly ascending the stairs, I braced myself for what I might see next. Faint sounds of their intimacy reached me as I approached the top of the stairs, making my stomach churn. The bedroom door was wide open, as they clearly believed they had the house to themselves. Slowly and cautiously, I crept closer, their voices growing louder with each step. From the doorway, I saw Stephen lying on his back, completely undressed, while Sarah straddled him. They were locked in the classic 69 position, oblivious to everything but their pleasure. They were so engrossed in each other that I managed to take a few steps into the room without being noticed. I knew the hidden cameras wouldn't provide the level of detail I needed, so I raised my handheld camera and recorded several minutes of their betrayal in high definition. The rage bubbling inside me begged for release. Every fiber of my being wanted to grab a baseball bat and beat Stephen into oblivion. But Mark's wise words echoed in my head. "Don't do anything stupid." Gritting my teeth, I slowly backed out of the room and left the house. Driving back to the hotel, my mind was a whirlwind of hatred and pain. The anger I felt was overwhelming, terrifying in its intensity. I couldn't recall a time I'd been so consumed by fury. Needing someone to talk to, I called Daniel and shared everything I'd done, including the information I had gathered. Daniel was supportive, but voiced concern about the risks of sneaking back into the house again. Apologizing for the difficult situation, he offered to help in any way he could. I thanked him and mentioned my intention to speak with Jason for further advice. Daniel agreed to arrange a meeting for the weekend, reminding me that Jason had expressed a willingness to help. After the call, I tried to sleep, but the images and emotions from the night haunted me, making rest impossible. Frustrated, I laced up my running shoes and headed out for an early morning run, hoping the physical exertion would help clear my head. While it dulled the edge of my anger, the relief was fleeting. Returning to the hotel, I showered and eventually succumbed to exhaustion, taking a long nap to recover from the sleepless night. Later, I returned the rental car to the airport and picked up my own vehicle before heading to the office. I needed to speak with Hal, my boss, about reducing my travel obligations. Once in his office, I closed the door and laid everything out, framing it around Sarah's desire for me to be home more. Hal listened carefully, and after a moment, he informed me that my promotion had been approved. With it came a significant reduction in travel, something that should have been a relief. But I couldn't fully appreciate the news, as my mind was preoccupied with my wife's betrayal. Hal noticed my distraction and pressed me gently about what was going on. Feeling a need to confide in someone, I told him the truth. I explained how I'd caught Sarah with her lover, recorded the incident, and was now working to gather more evidence. Hal's reaction was a mix of shock and sympathy. He assured me of his support and promised to keep everything confidential, especially since someone at the office might have been leaking my travel schedule. I expressed my intent to confront Sarah once I had undeniable proof, either to salvage our marriage or protect myself in a divorce. Hal nodded, understanding my position, and assured me he'd cover for me if I needed time off. His discretion and support were a small comfort in the storm I was navigating. That evening, I returned home and did my best to act normal. My daughters, my angels, ran to greet me as I walked through the door, their laughter melting my heart. Holding back tears, I couldn't stop thinking about how a divorce would impact them. The thought of needing permission to see my own children was unbearable. No matter what, I had to secure custody. The following Saturday, while Sarah and the girls were out shopping, I met with Jason and Daniel at a diner to discuss my progress. Over coffee, I updated them on what I had uncovered, including the detailed footage and Stephen Bannister's identity. Jason looked at me with a mix of admiration and surprise, commending my restraint and courage. "I honestly thought you might have done something drastic by now," he admitted. Curious, Jason leaned forward and asked how he could help, referencing Daniel's mention of my military background and the strategic patience I'd shown. For the next hour, I laid out my plan, detailing the steps I'd taken and the results I hoped to achieve. Jason listened intently, occasionally nodding as I spoke. When I finished, he smiled approvingly. "That's a solid plan," Jason said, leaning back in his chair. "I know someone who might be able to help, someone with the right connections. They might even recommend others who can assist." His suggestion piqued my interest, and I realized that with Jason's network, I could gain an edge in exposing Stephen and protecting my future. Jason cautioned me that any help his contacts provided would likely come at a cost. He agreed to make some calls and promised to update me once he had spoken with them. I handed him my number, asking him to get in touch when he had news so we could arrange a meeting and finalize the details. After bouncing around a few additional ideas, I realized there were still a few tools I needed to purchase online for the next phase of my plan. The rest of the weekend unfolded as usual, with one glaring exception. Sunday night, Sarah and I usually shared some intimacy, but this time she claimed she wasn't feeling well. It wasn't the first time she'd said this, but it had been over a month since we'd last been close. I felt the weight of her continued distance. With another trip looming, I asked Hal to approve the following week off, requesting that if anyone inquired, they be told I was on a normal business trip. Hal was more than accommodating and wished me luck. Next, I informed Sarah that this upcoming trip would be longer than usual. Her reaction was as I expected, unhappy but resigned. Trying to lighten the mood, I reassured her that my frequent travel was coming to an end and joked, "Soon, you'll be sick of having me around." She didn't smile. Instead, she sighed and told me to call her when I arrived at my destination. Her distant tone left me feeling that the end of our marriage was inevitable. I left the house before I said something I'd regret, heading to the airport. My meetings with clients went smoothly, and I wrapped up ahead of schedule, allowing me to fly back a day early. Throughout the week, I checked the cameras religiously. Stephen didn't show up at the house, but Sarah's secret phone made several appearances. Listening to one of her conversations confirmed her plans for another rendezvous, and this was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Back at the office, I found my latest online purchases waiting for me. Knowing Sarah's gym routine, I used her spare car keys to discreetly place a tracking device in her car where she wouldn't find it. Later, I drove to Stephen's condo. His car was in the carport, confirming he was home. I brought my camera, positioning myself to see inside through his sliding glass doors. Luck was on my side. Stephen wasn't alone. He was with another woman. They were kissing and touching, clearly more than just friends. I recorded their interaction, marveling at the irony. When they left for lunch, I followed at a safe distance, waiting for the chance to place a tracking device on his car. Though risky, I managed to attach it without being seen. Now all I had to do was wait, a task that tested my patience more than anything. A call from Jason informed me that he'd found someone who could help with my plan. We arranged to meet at my hotel room to avoid being seen together in public. That evening, Jason introduced me to Joe, a computer hacker willing to assist. Over the next hour, I detailed Sarah's affair and my goal to exact revenge on Stephen. I showed Joe copies of the information I'd gathered from Stephen's wallet, including his ID and financial details. Joe raised concerns about the legality of our actions, questioning what was in it for him. After a moment of consideration, I offered him $5,000, half up front and the rest upon completion of the job. He accepted but insisted on precautions to avoid detection. We discussed breaking into Stephen's condo to access his computer and gather more incriminating evidence. Using my laptop, Joe reviewed Stephen's recent purchases, which revealed 2 airline tickets to Las Vegas and a 5-night hotel reservation. This revelation sealed our decision to proceed. Joe asked if Stephen had an alarm system in his condo. Admitting I didn't know, I tasked him with finding out. He agreed, though he requested an increased fee if additional precautions were needed. I reluctantly agreed. Tracking Stephen and Sarah's movements from my tablet, I confirmed the devices I'd placed were functioning perfectly. Video feeds from my house showed Sarah packing a small bag for the trip, confirming my suspicions. On the day of their departure, I monitored their progress from my hotel room. Joe and I met later that afternoon. He had determined there were no visible alarm systems, but still emphasized caution. As night fell, we approached Stephen's condo. Joe, carrying his laptop and tools, quickly knelt by the door to pick the lock. Within a minute, the door swung open, and we slipped inside. After ensuring no alarms were present, we located Stephen's computer. Joe got to work while I methodically recorded video of the condo's layout, ensuring we could return everything to its original state. As Joe worked, I rummaged through Stephen's mail and documents, uncovering details about his bank accounts and credit cards. His affluence was apparent from the luxurious furniture and meticulous cleanliness. Joe's triumphant exclamation pulled me back to the living room. He had accessed Stephen's online bill payments, uncovering several extra credit cards and checks. Joe proposed maxing out the cards and even emptying Stephen's bank account. With the information I'd already obtained, including his social security number, this was entirely possible. Excited by the prospect, Joe suggested leaving Stephen broke upon his return from Las Vegas. I approved, agreeing it was the perfect welcome-home gift. Joe reiterated the importance of covering our tracks, pointing out the latex gloves we wore as evidence of our caution. While Joe continued working, I returned to the bedroom and stumbled upon a shoebox in the back of Stephen's closet. Inside were labeled DVR discs, each bearing a woman's name. Sorting through them, I froze when I saw Sarah's name. Stephen had been recording their encounters. But why? Joe called me over, pointing out something disturbing on Stephen's computer. Stephen wasn't just an adulterer. He was a blackmailer. The files Joe uncovered contained explicit videos of multiple women. While the women's faces were clear, Stephen's face was often obscured or out of frame, revealing a calculated attempt to conceal his identity. Jason noted that Stephen's emails contained evidence of blackmail, with messages threatening the women involved, warning them of dire consequences if they didn't comply. Joe speculated that Stephen specifically targeted married women with children, exploiting their vulnerabilities for financial and personal gain. Furious and determined to retaliate, I asked Joe if all the videos might be stored on Stephen's hard drive. He wasn't certain, but suggested the DVDs I found in the closet could hold the only copies. I decided to take the DVDs with me while searching for a backup drive. After combing through the condo, I returned to Joe, who triumphantly informed me he had located Stephen's backup drive. I instructed Joe to perform a complete backup of the contents before wiping the hard drive clean. Outlining the next steps, I explained that we would bankrupt Steven and dismantle his blackmail operation. I also wanted to contact the women he had targeted to let them know they were no longer under his control. Joe offered to set up an anonymous email account from Steven's computer to communicate with the victims, and I readily agreed. As we wrapped up, I performed a final sweep of the condo to ensure everything was as we had found it. Satisfied, we locked up and left. Back at the cars, I handed Joe an envelope with the rest of his payment, thanking him for his help. He assured me he was ready to assist with the next phase whenever needed, then drove off. I returned to my hotel to continue executing my plan. Later that evening, I called my in-laws to check on my daughters. My father-in-law answered, and I cheerfully asked about the girls, feigning normalcy. He reassured me that Emma and Lily were well-behaved and mentioned Sarah's weekend trip with her friends. Pretending ignorance, I said I hadn't spoken to her yet, but would check in soon. It was clear from his tone that he had no knowledge of her affair in Las Vegas, deepening my contempt for her deceit. After the call, I dialed the house, knowing Sarah wouldn't be there, and left a message. When she didn't call back, I tried her cell phone. Again, no answer. Frustrated, I left a more direct message, expressing my worry and urging her to call me back. I added that if I didn't hear from her within the hour, I'd contact her parents. 15 minutes later, Sarah called. Her tone was tense as she asked if everything was all right, mentioning that she'd tried the house but received no answer. I assured her everything was fine, explaining that I had taken the girls to my parents' house after spending time with friends. Her voice sounded uneasy as I suggested we plan a night out together when I returned. Her lukewarm response and reluctance to engage fueled my suspicions. Keeping my tone light, I teased her, trying to provoke a reaction. She claimed exhaustion and hinted at ending the call. Respecting her wishes, I bid her good night and told her I loved her before hanging up. My anger simmered beneath the surface, and sleep eluded me once more. The next morning, I received the call every parent dreads. Emma had been injured at school and taken to the hospital. Panicked, I dropped everything and rushed to the emergency room. When I arrived, I learned she had broken her arm. She was crying and asking for her mother, but Sarah was nowhere to be found. I called her cell and, when she didn't answer, left a furious voicemail. If you don't call me in the next 15 minutes, the next call I make will be to a divorce lawyer. An hour later, Sarah finally called. I rejected the call, focusing on comforting Emma as the doctor set her arm. Eventually, she calmed down, and I took her to her grandparents' house. After ensuring she was settled, I made a call to a divorce lawyer and scheduled an appointment. When Sarah called again, I answered. Her tone was sarcastic, referencing my supposed luck in Vegas. Through tears, she claimed Steven was blackmailing her with videos from their affair, threatening to release them publicly. I responded coldly, reminding her that she had chosen this path. "You've made your bed. Now you can lie in it," I said before hanging up. I moved Emma and Lily into a separate room at my hotel, contacting Sarah's father to explain the situation and assure him the girls were safe. He expressed concern but agreed to care for them temporarily while we sorted things out. The next day, I instructed my lawyer to proceed with serving Sarah divorce papers. I also called Jason to move forward with our plans against Steven. Max out his credit cards, empty his bank accounts, and destroy his credit, I said, determined to see Steven pay for what he had done. Jason agreed, calling it a fitting retribution. 3 days later, I received the call I had been waiting for. It was a video call. On the screen, Steven sat tied to a chair, bruised and bloodied. A voice off camera addressed him calmly, referencing his financial troubles and recent trip to Tijuana. The speaker hinted at Steven's fate, alluding to someone named Santiago and a special stew. "This could have gone to court," the voice continued, "but we thought we'd save everyone the trouble." The feed cut out shortly after, and I knew I would never hear from Steven again. He had disappeared without a trace, and no one would ask questions. 7 months later, I was divorced and had full custody of Emma and Lily. Sarah and I agreed to sell the house when the girls were older and split the proceeds. There was no alimony or child support, as I wanted nothing from her. Sarah had visitation rights, but our interactions were minimal. A year after the divorce, I began dating Lisa, one of Lily's former teachers. She was kind, grounded, and, to my surprise, had a great rapport with both girls. Though I hadn't decided on remarriage, I felt content taking things slow and focusing on building a stable life for my daughters. For the first time in years, I felt free.